Welcome to NHRD Pune YouTube channel. I'm Neena Kamal and I'm back after a short break with a new episode of PeoplePoint. We are trying a new format of the interview now, and we would love to hear your feedback once you watch this episode. Tell us what is working and what we can still further change. We are trying to now talk to our guests about a particular focus topic and try and understand their experience and about that particular focused area rather than something very broad. So let's get started. Today's our guest is Ms. Janani Prakaash, Global Head Human Resources for Quantela, and she's a very young and dynamic HR professional from the city of Hyderabad. She has over 16 years of experience in all aspects of HR. She is an award-winning HR leader and influencer. She is the executive committee member on and young council member of NHRD Network Hyderabad. She's by qualification originally an engineer, but she's also a gold medalist for her HR qualification. Along with that, she is also a yoga instructor, a trained classical and music vocalist. She's a Veena player and she's teacher of classical music. Janani, we are really very excited to have you on our platform. Thank you so much for taking out time, and we are looking forward to hear your expertise.
Thank you, Neena. It's my pleasure to be part of this forum and looking forward to having a great conversation.
Fantastic. So today we are going to talk to Janani about a very specific area, and that is HR in startups. So, Janani, I want you to share your first-hand experience, your knowledge, your ideas about how do you think HR in startup organizations is different than HR in an established organization? And the second part of the question is about, of course, how we can, as HR professionals, equip ourselves so that we can create maximum impact if such an opportunity arises where we work for a startup.
Sure. Very pointed question. So let me take the first part of the question, Neena. If you look at how is it working for a startup different for a HR professional when compared to any other larger organization, there are 5 or 6 aspects that I would like to point out based on my experience. Again, startup as I'm realizing is again a huge ecosystem. So my experience is with 2 startups in the last many years. So I would like you to take it from that perspective. All right. So the number one point is in a startup, the HR professionals need to have very broad range of experience or willingness to work on broad areas of HR. Like, let's say you're coming from a compensation and benefits background. You may have to dirty your hands in ops, sometimes in engagement, sometimes in diversity, equity, inclusion. You know, it could be any topic, but then there has to be that fundamental willingness to be a generalist. Absolutely. As compared to how in an enterprise, it is increasingly becoming specialized to super specialized, right? And it's also rightfully so for enterprise setups. It works that way because they are very large and you need to control at least one process at one time. So it just works well for enterprises that way. If you see the mid-size segments, they are somewhere in between. But yes, the number one differentiator is broad HR expertise versus specialized HR expertise.
Absolutely.
At least the willingness has to be very high, right? Number 2 is while we keep hearing across in whatever reports we read, agility is the biggest quality that any professional should today possess across different organizations, be it large or small. I think the flavor is quite different in a startup as compared to large organizations. And I can tell that with conviction, having been in very large companies to small companies, that in a startup, you don't know what you're going to meet with in the evening. And you think everything is set and you're just hitting the bed and then there is a board meeting and life changes overnight. So you just don't know what's ahead, and therefore the level of agility one must have is quite different. Now, again, agility as a topic, right? It is in number of ways I can describe it as like agility in terms of knowing many things or willingness to do many things, or okay, I don't know, I will still try to manage something, or to just have the mindset of I'm going to thrive through an ambiguity is also agility for me, right? I think that aspect is very high in startups as compared to larger companies.
Absolutely.
Number three is closer to business. If you see in large companies as well, again, we say I work with the business. And in smaller companies also, we say we work with the business. Now, the biggest differentiator I have found is in large companies, let's say your company has 10,000 people and you're a HR leader for 2,000 people. Many times that business could be, let's say, managing knowledge management for your entire organization, or managing sales for your entire organization, or let's say technology for the whole organization. Most of the times in very large setups, every leader who is in business may not be close to P&L.
Yeah.
Whereas in smaller companies, if you're part of a leadership and you happen to be the HR leader there is just no option but to be very adept with the financial terms that get used there. Otherwise, you will feel lost, and over a period of time, your ability to add value also declines significantly. So, from that standpoint, the topic of business acumen and financial acumen is slightly different when it comes to a large company versus a small company. In startups, a lot of terminologies like valuation, EBITDA, revenue, bookings, and booking versus revenue, recurring revenue. These are the terminologies that get continuously used, and it's just critical for a HR leader or HR professional to have a very good grip and understanding of these things, because then it's easier to know how you can align your priorities to the business and you can add direct value to them. And by the way, numbers mean everything in smaller companies, but in larger companies, it's different. You still talk a lot about culture and well-being and many other things in large companies and small companies, but then the result orientation is what gets measured gets done, and therefore anything that HR professional is delivering as well needs to be measured in a startup. Just about two or three more points, and then maybe I'll take a pause. The flexibility to do anything, I think I touched upon it earlier, but resourcefulness to do anything with minimal to no resource, that has to be very high. For example, you may need to establish something in learning and development, or you may need to establish something in some process. You might not have a lot of cash flow or sometimes zero cash flow, but you still need to do stuffs. And then there has to be balance between what employees will want versus how the senior leadership will want to drive it, or the constraints will be very different in both sides. And HR is typically in the midst of those in a smaller company. So the resourcefulness quotient is very different. How you have your external connects, how you're able to leverage some of your colleagues from industry to learn basically on what's happening and how you can keep things forward looking, and how do you find products that are of low cost but high impact. These are very important aspects in a startup as compared to large companies. And then culture. Maybe this is a very critical topic. I'll tell you how this is different. In large companies, many times it's like you can see in their Wikipedia pages that these are the cultural elements, and then you have them integrated in the interview process, in performance management process. Everything is typically set and we follow it. Yes, there will be misalignments. Yes, there will be differentiators. But in a startup, what happens is you will have a set of people that initially started the startup like a startup, like 5, 10 people, to suddenly they grew to 50, then they became 100, 150. Then they go ahead and acquire another organization. Then they think, I think I need large company practices, so let me get people from enterprise. So if you see, the leadership itself becomes quite diverse from that way. You have people who have exited 3 organizations with successful IPOs as part of your leadership. And then you have people who have drawn very large structures, processes in big organizations. And then you have people who have always run with only 5 million, 10 million kind of revenue. So you have this mix, and therefore the definition of culture, the definition of what each of them want to retain actually keeps evolving. Therefore, in a smaller company or a startup, it's imperative to pause and then say, okay, now what's my new definition of culture? What is it that I want to be known for in the near future? What are the areas where I want alignment from people that are coming from outside? Looking at all of this, defining the culture and living it, and taking people along is a very different ball game because of what I just described. Um, Finally, branding. Startups typically do not have a brand, and we continue to work towards building a brand. And therefore, many times the leaders of startup companies are themselves personal brands. Many times people join there because of the brand that they are, or what they see. Many times it's also about the purpose of the organization. So these ways are, I mean, personal branding and branding of the organization is very critical in smaller companies or startups when compared to larger ones. Maybe I will just take a quick pause to see if there is a dialogue opportunity here before I move to the second segment.
Sure. So in my mind, I feel that fortunately I have been working as an HR consultant, and I feel one of the biggest ways to describe HR role would be that to have consulting mindset when you're working for a startup organization. When you work for a big organization, obviously you have a role given and you have a particular area to look at, and then you are part of the big picture all the time. Whereas in startup kind of a setup, the situation, as you rightly said, it is so dynamic that you can't look at all the time at the bigger picture, or I want to know all the information, I need all these data points. All those luxuries are not there, but you need to have a consulting mindset which will say that, okay, with this particular data set, this information, I'm just trying to deal with this particular problem. And I think that is what you actually meant when you talked about agility and flexibility and all these aspects. The
Absolutely.
second thing which I would love to talk about is the learning mindset. As an HR person, sometimes we forget that we also have to keep learning, because the business the startup is in will have so many industries changing, and there are so many changes in the organization which are driven by the market or the customer situations. So as HR people, we also need to keep learning, and I think that's what you meant when you talked about say something like being resourceful or being open, or being aware of the culture or the people who are changing, what changes with them. So I think yes, what you're rightly saying is that it's a different ballgame, but it is far more exciting, isn't it, as an HR person?
It depends on the personality of people, I would say. Um, a startup is not for everyone. Similarly, for some people who have always worked in startup, maybe enterprise is not for them, right? It's a classic fit of what individuals want and what the place has an offer. I think there is an opportunity for anybody to enjoy everything as well. Like I have been able to find the best in different places, and I've been able to enjoy. Uh, but yes, it's not for everyone as well, I guess. If someone is looking for, I need to exactly know how my day will look like or the next 3 months will look like, I don't think it's easy for them initially, unless they're like, I want to change my life, I want to rock the boat, and I want to live a different way of work life. I think then they can embark into it. Otherwise, maybe it's a different setup that they should look at.
Fair enough. So what about HR? What can we do to create maximum impact in a startup situation? What's your take on that?
Like I initially pointed out, the business and financial acumen has to be very high in a startup as compared to any other larger organizations, because you have many layers. There are people who you can look up to within the organization if you're in a large company, but in a smaller company it's different, right? So that's the number one aspect. Number two is the ability to be able to still create a structure despite of ambiguity, right? Because you otherwise don't know, you're just busy all the time and you don't know what you're accomplishing, and you're measured for your outcome. So we can't say that, hey, I've been busy all day but no positions are closed. I've been busy all day and I've not been able to create an engagement charter, right? Or redraft the performance management for an organization. So it's very critical to say, how am I going to structure at least 50 to 60% of the year?
Yes.
How can I create a charter of sort and still plan only for 50 to 60%? Because in a startup environment, 20 to 25% of the time goes in managing ad hoc aspects that are totally unknown. Sometimes it could just be scratching for some piece of data, or sometimes in some country there is some issue and you don't know how to solve it. So we just learn through the process. Many times I jokingly say, working in a startup is like flying a plane while building it.
Well,
because it's like you're building an organization that has to be futuristic, but it's also, you need to also have the basics happening rightly. So that's why you need to fly the plane also, but you need to build something futuristically. So that brings me to the third point of, you should have a very strong external network that you can lean upon. Of course, there is a lot of give and take with respect to, hey, what are your practices? Which tools are you using nowadays? What's happening latest in tech? What can you offer as an HR professional to them and learn from them also? I think that's going to be very important. And that will be a very critical factor to add value in a startup environment, because there is no one else. You don't have a support system to lean on to. The buck stops at you. So that way it's very critical. The most important aspect I want to point out is having a specific time frame for learning. Like 15 to 20% of the time has to be allocated for learning. And this learning can be online or network or coffee conversations with colleagues externally, or group learnings within the team. Definitely be mindful about reading some of the very established trends, because that's the only way we will be ahead and abreast of what's happening. And mind you, we are also designing the organization and team for the future. So only these things will help us to not get comfortable within a particular area. And, we may just get lost otherwise and think, yeah, the world is within this border. And that can happen very easily in a startup, because you can get drawn with the day-to-day operations. So these must be intentional efforts. I think these will certainly help add value. Of course, a lot of patience is needed, Neena, in this environment.
Patience is needed. Very well said. Very well said, Janani. I also want to say that 15 years ago, nobody would have thought that we will have extremely qualified people who will work on something like a 0-hour contract or flexi-hour contract, or all these options will be available. We didn't think about it. As an HR people, we were very clear that, okay, there is a full-time employment, there is a contract employment. But see, 15 years, and now we are today, even our top brains are given flexibility of choosing what kind of employment contracts they want to have. So as an HR person, we need to understand that, see, these things are part of the working world now, and we need to be influential enough to bring it to our leadership when you are working in a startup, that, okay, do you want to consider something like this? Do you want to look at these alternatives? And that's also another very, and as you rightly said, if we keep ourselves abreast of what are the latest trends, I'm sure we will be far more confident in presenting it to the business leadership, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the opportunities to innovate is very high in startups, and the tolerance for mistakes are also much higher. So it's great for people who want to try something new, or like, okay, I know only so much, but I have heavy learnability, and I want to do different things and expand who I am as a person. I think startups are really good for that. At the same time, the speed with which mistakes need to be managed is also really high. And you might many times not have a layer to support. So these are things people will need to think of. And more number of startups are going to crop in, right? India is now the third largest startup ecosystem in the world and is fast approaching to become the second. And then entrepreneurial spirit is also extremely high if you look at it in the current and next generations.
Absolutely.
The next generations are literally start talking about, I'm going to set up a company like this. I will work in this kind of a place. Um, it's like you're going to have more such. So it's important that we create more HR people, or more HR people become willing to be part of these kinds of ecosystems as well.
Fantastic. Brilliant conversation, Janani. Now, I'm going to take a minute and take Aman's suggestion and ask you a question, which would be, in a way, extension of what we've been talking. So, there is a startup and there is HR and startup. All this you have done. You've also you keep yourself on top of all the trends. You also have a very, very dynamic career. You obviously have a family to take care of. You also have cultural hobbies which you pursue consistently. So tell me something, three things which help you to do all of this possible, which makes it possible, three habits or something like that. Maybe two habits, whatever. I mean, I just want to know, how do you manage it?
Yeah, I mean, I live a startup life only. In the sense, 60% of my days are typically very scheduled. For many things where I don't need to use my brain or energy, I don't use them. Like, I just put them in order and follow a structure. Um, so what helps me really is, number one, I plan my week on Sunday evenings. I take a couple of hours. I plan what I need to do, what I need to delegate, what I need to read. That immensely helps me. I like to have the clarity as to how I'm going to approach the week. Because if you then are clear, ability to manage ad hoc becomes much better. So that's number one. Number two, I think a lot of credit to yoga and meditation. Every day when yoga is done or meditation is done, there is a sense of groundedness that I get into. And that really helps. Also, every time you do a pose and you break your own barrier of the past, it says that, okay, yesterday it was not possible, today it's possible, very good. Maybe there is another day it's not possible, and it's okay, right? So a lot of philosophical learning or inner learning happens. So that's a very critical piece for me. Number three, I write a lot on my own, very deeply reflective as a person. So I reflect, I write, journaling, gratitude, all of that helps me a lot. So I just clean up my mind and throw it off at the end of the day, and next day is a fresh day. So these are ways I keep myself sane. I try to keep myself sane, and therefore these things actually help me to do whatever I do. I also don't engage in a lot of entertainments that are entertainments for maybe most of the people, because my choices and whatever I enjoy are very different. So they are just aligned to whatever I'm doing. So it's perfectly fine.
Fantastic. Fantastic. What a brilliant conversation, Janani. Thank you so much for the time you gave us and all what you shared. It is going to be so meaningful to our viewers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neena, for the wonderful opportunity. And I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation with you.
Fantastic. Thank you. So, our dear viewers, please watch this new format and give us your suggestions. Keep sharing, subscribing, and talking about PeoplePoint. Thank you so much. See you soon.